Okay, let's dive into this, because we're looking at something today that absolutely fundamentally reframes how we should be thinking about the future of our economy. In this explainer, we're unpacking a really detailed, fascinating policy paper by Andrew Scott called the AI Sovereignty Compact. We constantly hear about AI as just this wave of new technology, right? Like a super tool that's going to make us all way more productive. But this paper argues that treating AI as just a productivity tool entirely misses the point. Actually, scratch that, it misses the whole shebang. Instead, we need to look at it as a massive macroeconomic and fiscal shock, like a true, literal stress test of a country's entire operating structure.
So, to help us systematically deconstruct this complex systems-level argument step by step, we're going to follow a really clear roadmap today. 1. The AI fiscal shock. 2. The automator's paradox. 3. Why AI is different. 4. Breaking the circular flow. 5. The wage degradation shock. And finally, 6. The AI sovereignty compact itself.
All right, part 1, the AI fiscal shock. Let's look at this macro stress test.
Before we get into any of the deep theory, think about the concrete stress test indicators here. The potential upside is just staggering. The paper points to a massive projected gain of $3.56 trillion in Australian national wealth, assuming optimized sovereign AI adoption. $3.56 trillion. I mean, it's exactly the promise of AI that has investors so incredibly hyped right now. That is an enormous, game-changing expansion of wealth and productivity.
But, and this is a massive but, you have to immediately contrast that incredible wealth uplift with this number right here, negative 90%. This represents an extreme case scenario of stress on the personal tax base, because if mass worker displacement actually happens, the conventional wage taxation system, the thing that actually funds democratic governments, it could become entirely non-viable. So the wealth goes way up, sure, but the mechanism the state uses to actually collect revenue, it completely collapses.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive state capacity risk it highlights. Look at this illustrative fall in the tax to GDP ratio, dropping off a cliff from 27.3% down to just 14.4% under a base collapse scenario. Think about what that actually means for a second. If corporate profits shift offshore or get offset and our wage taxes just disappear, the government simply cannot fund infrastructure. No roads, no health, no education, no defense. The state itself is essentially financially hollowed out. Which brings us right to the core proposition of this entire paper. And it's elegantly summarized in this quote. The worker was never just a cost. The worker was the customer. The author insists that we have to stop looking at labor purely as an expense on a corporate balance sheet. A worker is also the taxpayer. They're the mortgage holder, the renter, the citizen. That means you and me. When companies remove workers from the equation just to save costs, they are simultaneously weakening the demand base of the entire country.
So, moving on to part 2, the automator's paradox, private gain versus public loss.
If we shift our perspective down to the micro level for a second, we find this absolute core contradiction. For a single firm, replacing workers with AI looks entirely rational, right? You cut your headcount, you lower your costs, and boom, your operating margins expand. That is a clear, undeniable private gain. But when every single firm adopts this exact same logic at the exact same time, the economy suffers a massive public loss. Customer income is systematically destroyed, and aggregate demand just contracts. Everyone saves money on labor, but literally nobody has any money left to buy the products being made.
And this brilliantly illustrates that exact point. Take a hypothetical logistics company. Pre-AI, they've got 1,000 employees. Post-AI, they run the whole thing on 10. Their profit margin shoots up, generating an extra $12 million in company tax. Now, the government might be popping champagne for that corporate tax win. But look just below the surface. The employee tax base just lost 990 workers. That wipes out nearly $12 million in direct wage taxes. So that apparent corporate tax win, it's a total illusion when you factor in the massive loss of personal income tax, not to mention the loss of 990 active customers in the wider economic.
Ultimately, what is totally rational for one firm becomes completely destructive for the economy as a whole. An AI economy risks becoming self-cannibalizing. It gets brilliantly, terrifyingly efficient at producing output, but in doing so, it wipes out the very income flows required to actually purchase that output. You get incredible output capacity, but zero buyers.
Part 3, why AI is different. Why it's absolutely not just another tech wave.
Now, you might be thinking, hey, technology always changes work, right? We mechanized agriculture, we put computers in offices, and we always created new jobs. But the distinction here is that earlier automation was hardware constrained. It took literally decades to roll out new, heavy machinery. AI intelligence, though, operates at software scale. An AI model can be updated and pushed to millions of users in a matter of weeks, fundamentally altering the productivity equation across the entire globe almost overnight.
When you compare these specific dimensions side by side, the threat really clarifies. The replicability of AI has near-zero marginal scaling. Copying an AI workflow costs essentially nothing compared to, say, training a human expert for 20 years. Plus, the ownership is highly concentrated. In the past, owning capital equipment was somewhat dispersed. Today, the gains from AI flow disproportionately to a tiny handful of platform, cloud, and chip owners. Capital now has a permanent, overpowering substitution pathway over labor.
Let's move to part 4 and see how this builds. Breaking the circular flow. Severing the loop.
We really have to remember that a capitalist economy isn't just a static machine that makes things, it's a living, continuous circulation system. And it happens in 5 sequential stages. Think of it like this. Workers earn wages, which households then spend on consumption, which generates revenue for businesses, which allows for taxes to be paid, which finally allows the government to fund public services, which in turn support the workers. Wages are the absolute foundation of this loop. They are the engine of business revenue and government stability.
And the AI disruption severs this loop right at the top. Right at labor income and productivity without purchasing power isn't prosperity, folks. It's just idle capacity. If you sever this loop, you end up with perfect automated logistics delivering goods into a devastating demand recession. Why? Because the households targeted by all those hyper-personalized ads can no longer afford the product.
To put some hard numbers to this, the paper models a $1 trillion wage pool stress test. Look at the 50% automation scenario here. If half the wage pool is automated or severely compressed, that strips out $500 billion in wages, which results in approximately $125 billion in lost tax revenue. That is a massive loss for roads, schools, hospitals. To put that into perspective, a shock of that size doesn't just make budgets tight, it turns normal budget management into a structural catastrophe. The state as we know it simply couldn't function.
Which brings us to part 5, the wage degradation shock. This is the quieter, second-order problem.
See, it's not just the people who actually lose their jobs that we need to worry about. The paper highlights a severe replacement pressure ratio for those left behind. Imagine a labor market where there are 3 displaced, highly capable people waiting in the wings for every single open position. That 3-to-1 ratio, it completely changes the power dynamic of the workplace. So the crucial point here is this concept of employment without security. Your job still exists, sure, but your bargaining power has completely collapsed. You can't ask for a raise. You can't refuse an intensified workload. The employer absolutely no longer needs to share any productivity gains with you because that desperate outside labor pool crushes any leverage you might have had. And this wage suppression causes households to delay spending, save whatever they can out of fear, and that just further drags down economic demand.
All right, part 6, the AI Sovereignty Compact. What's the new national strategy?
So to prevent this systemic collapse, the author proposes a clear roadmap built on 4 interconnected pillars. First up, build sovereign AI capability, meaning domestic compute, data control, and robotics, so a country isn't totally dependent on foreign infrastructure. Second, reform taxation. We need to target automation rents and AI super profits instead of just taxing labor. Third, replace obsolete welfare with an economic continuity model. And fourth, protect democracy and dignity so displaced citizens don't just lose their stake in the future. Crucially, AI, tax, defense, and education can no longer be stuck in their own little silos. They have to be treated as one unified national strategy.
Let's look a little closer at that third pillar, the tiered wage replacement model. The paper argues that traditional poverty-level welfare will straight up fail because it causes a household's consumer demand footprint to completely collapse, and that hurts the broader economy. Instead, you need an economic continuity model to actively save the market itself. For low-income workers, full replacement up to a living floor. For middle-income households who are literally the anchor of mortgage servicing and local business demand, a high replacement rate is absolutely essential. Upper bands get partial transitional support, and the wealthy get none unless they're genuinely income dependent. The whole goal here is preserving purchasing power to save the market economy itself. Which brings us to the author's provocative final thought for this explainer. As artificial intelligence fundamentally reshapes the foundations of work, wealth, and the state, we are faced with a really stark choice. Will we choose sovereign participation,
where we actively adapt our operating structure, our tax systems, and our social contracts to actually survive and thrive in the AI age? Or will we passively slide into digital dependency, becoming a hollowed-out market for foreign-owned intelligence systems? The technology is absolutely inevitable, but the economic outcome? Well, that is still entirely up to us.